everybody who stood with us this far. The fight is not over. We're going to continue to fight. I met with Mayor de Blasio this morning, myself and Reverend Sharpton, the person one of the people who's been standing by my side since the beginning. I definitely let Mayor de Blasio know that this will not stop. You can call me in a meeting, you can say what you want to say. You can say it's not on you, you can say it's on this person, but just know that what's on me is that we're shutting the city down.
That's right!
We're not going to be violent, but guess what? No peace. As I said before, no justice,
no peace.
So until we get a decision, every day, so we're going to be everywhere. All 5 boroughs, all 50 states. We're gonna do it. It's gonna happen. Shut it down. We ain't get it?
Shut it down!
We get it?
Shut it down!
We get it?
Shut it down!
That's it.
Eric Garner's daughter, who you just heard, and Eric Garner's daughter is right. They were in every 50 state, if you want to call it that, and just in case you don't remember, Eric Garner was a gentleman that was choked to death by the cops, Pantaleo, on the streets of New York, selling loose cigarettes. Selling loose cigarettes is a misdemeanor, but in that case, not so much for Eric Garner. Garner had been stopped 30 times prior to this particular engagement. And like anybody else who's stopped 30 times by the cops, you may feel some kind of way about them stopping you, especially if you believe that to some degree there's a certain degree of unfairness built into the process. As he laid on the ground, he screamed, "I can't breathe." Or you could say he whispered or choked or gargled, "I can't breathe." That didn't stop them from choking him to death on the streets of New York. Right now, Bill de Blasio, who's mayor of New York, has been questioned about why is this guy still on the job? Why hasn't he been fired? And why hasn't action been taken by de Blasio? De Blasio, on the debate stage, finally gets the answer for that question. And not just answer for that question, is heckled remorselessly on the debate stage for this very issue. Fire Pantaleo. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you enjoy this content and you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please consider liking, sharing, and of course, you can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. YouTube is an untrustworthy actor, and so it's not necessarily that I love saying this in every video. It's more so this is just kind of par for the course of working on YouTube. Bill de Blasio. So Mayor de Blasio, who breathlessly tells you about his black son, is in a position where an African American was choked to death on the streets of New York for selling loose cigarettes, loosies. Now, if you remember, New York had that vicious stop and frisk law, where, if I am not mistaken, 80% of the people they stopped just so happened to be black or Hispanic. Now, if you're talking about the crimes that the people were committing, well, you start looking at how many guns were found. This was like in the single digits. I mean, you're talking about disrupting people as they go about their way in a country where they're supposed to be legal citizens to be on the streets with just as much right as anyone else. But it seems that some people could be on the streets with a bit more rights than other people. Whatever you want to think of this particular issue, certainly it's not right that a man gets choked to death on the streets of New York. And oftentimes whites have a tendency of saying, well, he should have followed the law. The guy got stopped 30 times in prior. You're acting as if there's not animosity built into that when you feel like the law is targeting you or treating you unfairly. Either way, at the very least, hopefully, we can come down on the side of, at the very least, he shouldn't be choked to death on the streets of New York. Putting that issue to the side for the moment, you're in the Democratic primary. And in that Democratic primary, blacks vote 90%. De Blasio, on a debate stage, who breathlessly tells you about his black son, gets asked this very specific question. Why does this guy still have his job. And no, it wasn't the debate moderators that brought that up. It was Garner's supporters, who, just like Garner's daughter said, will be everywhere. In this case, they were literally everywhere.
And to make sure it's a country that puts working people first.
Last week, the President of the United States attacked an American city, calling it a disgusting, rat-infested, rodent mess. We need a nation that understands that these tired, old language,
This went on for a good 30 seconds. Shut it down. And that's literally what it did. It shut the debate down.
Stand
Watch.
by, Senator.
I will stand by.
Please.
I'll stand by. They shut it down. They did exactly what they said they were going to do. They shut it down. Fire Pantaleo. That's what they were screaming. Fire Pantaleo. Fire Pantaleo. Fire Pantaleo. Why? Because Bill de Blasio is on that debate stage. And Bill de Blasio is running for president of the United States. And their point is, wait a minute, how does this guy still have his job? He choked a man to death on the street. The federal government is not going to do anything about it. Why don't you? Stop telling me about your black son. This black man got choked to death. Why aren't you doing anything about it? Now, wherever you are on the spectrum, and regardless, in the sense of, wherever you are on the spectrum in this case, certainly that is a legitimate question to ask de Blasio. I suppose if you're conservative, you just want to get points. But if you're on the left, you don't like the fact that he didn't fire Pantaleo. And you want him to answer that very question. And in this debate, Castro brings this up, forcing de Blasio to have to deal with this very question.
An example the other day of the Department of Justice not going after Officer Pantaleo, that, Officer Pantaleo used a chokehold that was prohibited by NYPD. He did that for 7 seconds, 11 different times. Eric Garner said that he couldn't breathe. He knew what he was doing, that he was killing Eric Garner, and yet he has not been brought to justice. That police officer should be off the street.
Let me tell you, I know the Garner family, they've gone through extraordinary pain. They are waiting for justice, and they're going to get justice. There's finally going to be justice. I have confidence in that. In the next 30 days in New York. You know why? Because for the first time, we are not waiting on the federal Justice Department, which told the city of New York that we could not proceed because the Justice Department was pursuing their prosecution. And years went by, and a lot of pain accrued. And in the meantime, what I'm working on is making sure, and I have for 5 years, there will never be another tragedy. There will never be another Eric Garner, because we're changing fundamentally how we police.
Thank you. You heard earlier, Mayor.
That's his answer. That's his response. The Garner family made a point of saying, look, racist Giuliani, and this is their language, racist Giuliani fired a cop when a similar situation took place in New York. And they kind of made this point of, but you're telling us that your hands are completely tied on this issue. How are your hands tied on this issue, but Giuliani's hands weren't? That's, and that's a damn good point. That's a damn good point. Let's hear Gillibrand. Gillibrand wants to take a piece out of him also.
Mayor de Blasio respond to Secretary Castro on the question of why the police officer who killed Eric Garner is still on the NYPD. Was that response adequate? Please respond.
When you know, because you have a video, when you know he said, "I can't breathe," so many times over and over again, when you know he used an illegal chokehold, that person should be fired. And if I was the mayor, I'd fire him. But as president, I would make sure that we had a full investigation, that the report would be made public. And if I wasn't satisfied, we would have a consent decree.
Well, we all just decided that we were going to express our views about Mayor de Blasio's lack of leadership for his failure to fire Daniel Pantaleo, the killer of Eric Garner. The man who died, who was choked to death in front of the whole world, has been allowed to continue to enrich himself in the city of New York by remaining on the police force. He wants to get up and proclaim himself to be a progressive. Well, show us your progressive credentials. Don't sit there and say you wanna create a more equitable society for everyone, while back at home you're allowing police officers to kill without any recourse or accountability black men, and that's not going to happen.
Enough said. Enough said. Fire Pantaleo. And I understand me saying enough said and then fire Pantaleo kind of looks weird. The New York CHA New York Cha case is a much bigger deal compared to Garner. And look, the thing that brought this to my attention, there was a secondary case. A case came out, I think it was today, that was leaked where a person with mental illness contacts the cops for help, and that guy ends up face down on the ground dead. The cops' recounting of that story didn't match up with the video evidence that they had to fight like tooth and nail to get put into the public spectrum, on public sphere. Understand what I'm saying. The guy called the cops himself. I had to read that story a few times. I was like, wait a minute. The guy who called the cops died? Yeah, the guy who called the cops for assistance. He says, I'm having a psychotic issue. I haven't taken my meds. I need help. The cops get there, and whatever takes place, he is face down on the ground, chokes to death. And they're laughing and ridiculing him as he chokes to death on the ground. Then, oh, and by the way, he was white. Your white skin is not your protectant. I keep saying that. I've said that on more than one occasion. Yes, we may get a cap faster. We may get choked to death faster. But it is not a protectant. Look, the cops are maniacs. I've said it on more than one occasion. Yeah, the cops are maniacs. I will say this. I like the fact that these guys heckled de Blasio. I like the fact that de Blasio had to, at the very least, answer for this. Meaning he at the very least has to explain himself. And fortunately, he just so happens to be on a debate stage where someone can ask him and engage him on this very specific issue. So, yes, I love it. Oh, right, all right, let's see. I'm going to disagree with you on this, Bob. Take race off the table as distracting talking points, and people might find ways to band together against the shit. Well, the problem is, Bob, that it does have a racial issue. I mean, look, I don't see the point in pretending. And maybe this is one of my biggest disagreements. You have some people who try to pretend as if race is not an issue. I'm sorry, it is. I think class is far more important. But when you get into finer details, where race is literally one of the things that seems to be one of the disparities here. And by the way, I know ultimately this has an issue of class at its basis. I mean, he's fucking selling cigarettes on the street. Do you honestly believe that he's selling loose cigarettes because he's making bank at home and he's just doing it for shits and giggles? He is not. He's selling loose cigarettes because he doesn't have ends meeting. The dollar he gets from that cigarette, the 50 cents, whatever he's getting from that cigarette. Do you honestly believe he's on the street because he wants to be? He's on the street because he needs to make ends meet. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. It's an issue of class, but it gets filtered through this issue of race only because at the end of the day, this guy just so happens to be black. And if this person was white, they may not have responded to him in that particular way. You can't take race off the table in this, regardless of the fact that they may be intermingled with issues of class. I think it's somewhat disingenuous to do otherwise. NYCHA is public housing. Oh, I see. Flint situation, fired whistle. It has a racial component, but we want solutions to police violence. Yes, we need to make it a universal issue. Garner, that I agree with you on. Don't misunderstand me. the reason why I make the argument that your white skin is not a protectant is because this is not entirely a racial issue. This issue intermingles with class, this issues with issues of authority and the way the state power. I mean, there's several threads of the issue. But in very specific detail, when we're talking about a disparity in the way that the police force uses force, and that disparity oftentimes breaks along the lines of class and race, then it's not insane to bring up race, seeing as race is one of the components. It is massively disingenuous. And this is something that the left does. The right wing does this in a way of, let's pretend like race has nothing to do with it, and those guys should have just, obeyed the law or whatever. But the left has this weird tendency of doing something very similar with this notion of pretending as if race doesn't exist. It's bizarre. I'm sorry, it's bizarre and disingenuous. Don Hooligan. Zach Hammond was a white kid murdered by the cop. Yeah. Unbelievable how de Blasio would get on a debate stage is right. DNC games. Look, de Blasio is trying to be president of the United States. And the funny part is, I didn't show the beginning of that. De Blasio, when he starts off in the DNC thing, he's like, I'm going to tax the hell out of the rich. It's like, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Bob Romero said, I think it depends on whether you want change or not. Look, Bob, if the way to get change is to literally pretending as if a component of the issue is not in fact a component of the issue, then the change that you're getting is not going to deal with the issue. I'm sorry. I mean, it has to be dealt with as is. I mean, it's reality. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, when you're looking at the research and it shows that African Americans are 4 times likely to get popped or locked up or get worse sentences as compared to the exact same thing for their white counterparts. Now, am I supposed to look at that and say, there's no race in this process? I'm sorry, it just is. It is what it is. It is what it is. The reality of it is, and this is the absolute true reality of it is, there's a weird feedback mechanism in the way our society has propagated itself. Something that started off as somewhat of an issue of class, cheap labor, gets instantiated into the society as an issue of race, because that disparity has propagated itself over time, and the society itself has instantiated that disparity to where you have issues of class now. And oftentimes, things like this gets filtered through this notion of race, even though looking at it a little bit more detail, it's, well, the guy's selling loose cigarettes on the street. The secondary factor is, if he was white doing that, would he have gotten killed? Both of those things factor into it. If he had ends, meaning if he was making ends meet, he wouldn't be trying to make 50 cents a cigarette. Think about what we're saying. Do you honestly believe that somebody wants to be on the street selling cigarettes? Loose cigarettes. A secondary point. If the guy was white, would he have been killed? Third point. Regardless of what the guy's color was, should cops engage with people in ways where the first response is violence? And lethal violence at that. And for the last point, to not have a consequence. People bitched and moan, yes. But is that really a consequence, considering you ripped the person from the physical reality? I'm sorry, all of these things factor into it. It's not one thing or the other. And, pretending as if an aspect of it doesn't exist because it may make you uncomfortable or something. Even if you believe that that's the only way for you to get change. I mean, think about what you're saying. You have to pretend that reality is not reality in order to try to get some level of change. On this very specific issue. Honestly, man, any notion of intersectionality, any notion of it, the left breathlessly likes to talk about it. Intersectionality. We got blacks, whites, we have gays, we have lesbians, we have all of these things. And we talk about it breathlessly. And then something like this happens. And bam, there's the division. You got to pretend as if that's not what that is. in order to get some level of people to organize around getting change. That's astonishing. And look, it's not that I think you're even wrong, which is the sad part. It's more so just the reality of it that on the left, any notion of intersectionality means that African Americans have to pretend as if an issue is not an issue. Then there's no intersectionality. It doesn't exist. Come on. There has to be some level of cross-pollination, right? On issues of women issues, or issues that pertain mostly to women, don't you have to have support from others? Women only make up 50% of the population. I guess my point is, if the left is really doing this thing of intersectionality, as they call it, per se, that has to mean something. And I have to be honest, as I pursue this channel, I don't think it does. I don't think it works. In fairness, I think people think that way because brutality is often from black officers. Pantello's supervisor was a black woman, but not shown in the video. Well, I think race within the context of the police force doesn't matter as much, if that makes sense. It's almost like where I say class is more important. Well, class is more important. It doesn't necessarily mean that racial factors doesn't factor into it, especially with the culture of this country. The same thing is true, however, for the blue line. It's like, who do you find your allegiance to? Well, in that case, they're cops. Their allegiance is going to be to each other. NYCHA is a public housing Flint situation, fired the whistle. I'll check this out. NYCHA case is much bigger deal compared to Garner. I check it out. Look, man, at a basic, we ask police to do things they shouldn't have to do. That is infinitely true. We ask essentially a hammer to do the work, I don't know, of a sausage carrier or something. And in asking people to do things that they should not be doing, you end up in situations that have bad outcomes. The Eric Garner thing, if you had a society that was more equitable, the Garner case doesn't happen. And a society that is more equitable, maybe Bill Gates doesn't have $100 billion. Maybe he has 50. This doesn't happen. This is an issue of class, filtered through the lens of race. Do you honestly believe that any sane and rational human being that was making ends meet would be on the street selling cigarettes? If that person had their ends and he was not on the street selling cigarettes, he would not be getting choked to death. That doesn't let Patello off the hook, so don't misunderstand me. But I'm saying from a societal standpoint, this should never happen. Nor should you need your cops to deal with somebody on the street like this if your society didn't have people on the street like this. And I don't mean not having them on the street by saying don't be on the street. I'm saying not having them on the street because there was no need for them to be on the street doing this. Simultaneously, your police force should not be aggressive, angry, vicious human beings. That should not be your police force. Force should not be the first thing your cops go towards. There should be some notion of taking it down a notch. And not just this. He was stopped 30 times prior. So yeah, he was going to feel some kind of way about getting stopped again. This is not just an issue of race, which is my point. It's an issue of class. But let's not pretend that race is not a factor of this. Because I honestly believe if he was white, he would still be alive. That's not an absolute. And it's not to say that whites don't get killed by cops. Cops are rough, angry, aggressive maniacs. And whether you're white, black, Indian, gay, straight, somewhere in between, you could get beaten, tased, pepper sprayed, or, in this case, like this gentleman, or like the mentally ill gentleman that called cops for help murdered. De Blasio gets heckled. Good. Good. Again, a lot of this is a failure of our education system to develop critical analytical skills. People fall for these stupid narratives on both sides of the left and right and lack complex, original ideas. Yeah, I agree, Garner. I agree. I mean, look, our education system more so dumps you with information. And it gives you a perspective of the U.S. That's its job. That's what it does. Its goal, like you said, is not critical analysis. It doesn't have you to look at a situation and say, wait a minute, was the United States wrong in this? Or is there something else to this that I need to understand? Or it's just going to say, this is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a great man. He did this, 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 and this. It's not going to say, well, wait a minute, from the perspective of Native Americans, this guy was a goddamn lunatic. He was a Hitler of sorts. That's not part of our education system. So yeah, I agree. I gotta be honest. A lot of stuff, I learned more out of school than I did in school. Judge, jury, executioner. Yeah. All right, I'll leave it here. Brent McCarthy, I heard Sheila Blair and Greenspan for literally decades of the wealth gap is caused by education. Look, there's certain people who have every advantage in the world of telling you that the way society is awesome. And if there's any problems with it, it's your fault. Why? Because an argument for individualism, A, makes them feel awesome about themselves as if they did it entirely on their own. And B, excuse them of any level of blame, and even to some degree excuse society of any level of blame for any kind of societal ill that arises. It's all your fault. Rugged individualists, etc., etc., etc. Nothing can be further from the truth. These things are issues of policy. These things have always been issues of policy. And these things are not acts of God. Your society is not an act of God. It's not created in a cosmic sense. There's nothing God-given that says all of these human beings should have $120 billion, meaning, what's his name, should have $120 billion in a bank, or that Bill Gates should have $50-60 billion in a bank. There's nothing to say that Jeff Bezos, who creates an awesome contraption, yes, I can agree with you that Jeff Bezos, at least in the context of our current society, believes he should get more, and maybe he should. The question is, should that amount be infinite? And should that amount be infinite, especially cut against everyone else? This should never happen. That should never happen. And yet, you have a society that allows a top 1% to take away 51% of the wealth. Think about what we're saying with that. Even if you think that people who do things should get paid, should they get 51% of everything that is created? I mean, think about what we're saying with this. And if that's the case, what does it mean for everybody else? What does it mean for everybody else? Under Obama, 95% of the wealth went to the top 1%. 95% of the wealth. At worst, Trump could only beat him by 5%. That's the Democrat, the guy who they kept saying was a socialist. Think about your society at this point. This is not, again, crafted by God. This is crafted by laws. One law after the next. Allowing this to take place. Not God, laws. Greedy human beings. Corporations, companies, the wealthy. People who had a wealth just going through the years. People who create companies and then use the money from that company to put the money into the pocket of politicians in order to get them to pass certain laws. You working 2 jobs, you working 40, 50 hours a week, trying to deal with your kid and the family and everything else, is not paying attention to the laws and the policies that take place in Washington. So you just kind of assume it's my fault. It is not entirely your fault. There may be people who may be infinitely lazy, fair enough. But most of us are busting our ass to make ends meet. The cooks, the cleaners, the trash keepers, the people who are pouring your coffee, who are working at that particular restaurant that you like to go to, who does your streets, who ensures that you, when you get sick, can see a nurse, who takes you in the checkout counter. I'm talking about just people who, for the most part, fundamentally make society what society is, and yet are taking away a pittance of that society that they themselves create. The question needs to be asked, is that fair? And seeing as society is not necessarily cosmic, that there was no God that imposed our society, that these things were indeed laws, that your government in and of itself has no purpose in and of itself. It can be whatever you in that society want, what you in that society need. Environmental factors, for the most part, creates the needs in this case. And I'm saying those needs should be attended to by your governmental apparatus. They try to act as if government needs to be this or that. Government is whatever you want it to be, and it works however it needs to work to accomplish its ends. I'm not saying that it has, complete leeway across the board. I am saying, however, that you choose what you want it to do and you go about accomplishing those objectives. And your government, yes, can be attuned into all sorts of ways. And for the longest time, it has been attuned to the top 1%. And I'm saying that needs to change. This, yes, there are people who are saying this is racist. Yes, then this may be an element of race. But fact of the matter is, this event does not take place in a society that was more equitable and more fair, where a human being wouldn't have to be on the street selling cigarettes for 50 cents a pop. That doesn't excuse officers from choking the life out of them. It does raise a higher question about what is wrong with society where somebody would have to be on the streets selling cigarettes for 50 cents a pop. I'll leave it here. All right. I can't leave it here because people gave. Brent, Trudy, nothing to say. Paying my super chat dues. Thank you, Trudy. Brent McKinney, right on, Trudy. Thank you, Brent. Sir Bikes a lot. Castro had his bad cops too, mainly Bexar County. Look, hypocrisy is not part of this hypocrisy is not something that seems to be cared about in this process. So, there's that. All right, I'll leave this. Guys, if you enjoy the content, like, share, all that good stuff. Thanks all. Oh, by the way, tomorrow, you're probably not going to see me tomorrow. Tomorrow is my wife's birthday and anniversary. And if it's my wife's anniversary, unless she's married to somebody else, which she is not, that also means it's my anniversary. We've been married for 2 years. We've been together for 7, if I am not mistaken. We ended up getting married in Iceland, which was a badass experience. And so tomorrow we're going to spend the day. And if you ask me, why is her birthday and the anniversary is on the exact same day? Because some men don't pay attention and lose track of the anniversaries. I never wanted to lose track of the anniversary. Even if I became senile, I wanted to at the very least remember that, oh, right, birthday, anniversary, same day, got it. And then pursue from there. So, yeah. Here's a shout out to Mrs. Thomas. Happy birthday and happy anniversary. I'll leave it here. This is somewhat of a weird video to put that on, but this is the last video of the night. It just so happens to be the last video of the night. So, all right, guys. Have a good night.